Hi, everyone. This is the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'm your host, Janice Selby. I'm a registered professional counselor and a religious recovery consultant. I'm so happy today to have my guest with me because her book was instrumental in my own change and growth when I left religion. I'm speaking today with Dr. Marlene Winell. And her book is called Leaving the Fold. And it's just been so helpful to thousands of people around the world who have left fundamentalism. And Marlene also has an important online presence with journeyfree.org, where she works with people who are recovering from their own journey of religion. Welcome, Marlene.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So nice to see you again. And you, of course, have spoken at the conferences on religious trauma, and you recently joined me at a fireside chat for the Shameless Sexuality, Life After Purity Culture conference. I feel like I owe you so much because I was figuring things out on my own, but really it wasn't until I met you and read your book and came to one of your retreats that I started piecing together my own religious trauma and naming it as such.
Good. Well, I'm really happy it was helpful to you.
That book, I think, did you write it 25 years ago or something like that?
Something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure how many years it is now, but it's been a while.
Yes. Yeah. And so what's your background? I mean, I know it, but please share it with some of our viewers today. I'm sure they'd be quite interested to know why you wrote this book.
Well, I grew up evangelical Christian myself. My parents were missionaries in Taiwan. I was born in Hong Kong and then grew up in Taiwan, went to a Christian boarding school, and became a very zealous Christian myself. And then my family, when I was 16, my family moved to Southern California. This was 1968, Summer of Love.
Oh, boy.
And the Christians had their own version of being very cool Christians, their own hippie communes and everything with Calvary Chapel and so forth. So I got involved with that and became what they called a Jesus freak, and was seriously worried about Jesus coming back any day. So, I went through all that. It was very exciting, and I was very involved. But at the same time, I did a lot of reading and studying, and took everything very, very seriously in terms of my own faith, and gradually learned some things that made a difference in terms of how I understood the world, and gradually moved out of that whole mindset, especially during my college years.
Yeah. Were your parents in favor of you attending university, or were they afraid, because we know what happens? Kids go to a secular university, and of course, they get educated out of believing in religion.
Well, they weren't worried for some reason. Maybe they should have. I know a lot of religious groups are very down on further education like that, because it does affect people's faith. But they had always been an advocate of education. They pressed me to get good grades in school and do well that way. So. I think it was pretty disappointing to them when I left the faith, but that was the consequence.
Did you know anyone else who had been as devout as you had been and then walked away from the faith?
At the time, no. I mean, there were some people in our little group, that were Jesus freaks together. There was a couple other people that also moved away from it, but we all did that pretty independently. And for me, it was a matter of finding out that there were other worldviews that were making sense, and that we didn't have that Christianity didn't have a monopoly on what we called fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, and peace, and things that other people were also claiming to have, people from other religions, in fact, and that we did not have the only the only source of those things in our religion. And also getting really fed up with the church, getting fed up with the patriarchy. I was becoming more conscious of things like feminism and getting tired of the way the church was structured that way. And that was a big factor.
Wow. Is there anything that stands out to you as being particularly challenging for you regarding your own deconversion? I know lots of folks have a real hard time combating the fear of hell if they were indoctrinated in childhood. For other folks, pardon me, it's issues related to overcoming purity culture indoctrination and shame around sexuality. Was there anything for you that seemed particularly hard?
Well, I think probably the hardest thing was just losing this imaginary relationship. This, people have said that a relationship with God is like an adult imaginary friend, and I felt like I did have this very personal, very meaningful relationship with Jesus, and kind of like my first imaginary lover or something, was very, very important to me. So losing that, I think, was probably the hard thing.
Yeah, I can relate to that. It really felt like I experienced the death of someone very close to me. So then, of course, pardon me, to have other people just say, well, so what, you don't believe in Santa Claus anymore? It shows that people don't grasp the depth of the loss there, because it is extremely significant when your whole worldview kind of dissolves around you.
Yeah. And, even if it is imaginary, still, it's this entity that you talk to every day, you find comfort in, somebody that is always there, always understands you, and that you're going to see someday. So it is a very strange love relationship that you can have. And lots of people experience that.
Mm-hmm. I felt like Jesus was my cosmic big brother. Always had my back. I could run to him if I was being bullied or if things seemed overwhelming. And the way I responded physiologically, after pouring out my burdens to this non-existent entity that was very, very real to me, I did feel relief. And then, part of the struggle afterwards was, well, what now? Horrible things are still going on in my life and all around the world. And what do I do with it if I can't run to Jesus? So that was all part of the growth process too. Hard times for some folks, that's for sure. And then,
so you can understand why people stay for such a long time too, because it is comforting. It's also comforting to think that you've got this lovely place you're going to go after you die.
Oh yeah. Oh gosh. I was happy to release my fear of heaven, of course. I mean, fear of hell, but then I was mortified to think, oh my gosh, well, if that's not true, then maybe I won't be seeing my loved ones in heaven. And that was something else to find my way through and navigate.
Yeah.
And that's why you're
involved.
Pardon me?
There's grief involved, grief and anger that you've been deceived, and the feeling of being kind of lost and confused. All those feelings, like you have pointed out, are similar to a divorce. Yeah, it affects every aspect of your life.
It really, really does. And we're not given time off from the hard parts of life. We have to keep going to work. We have to keep caring for our children, even though we've suffered this tremendous loss. And so that's why the work of religious recovery consultants like you and religious trauma pioneers is so important, because the rest of us, we're suffering this if we just go to a regular therapist or psychologist and they don't have a background or understanding of religious trauma syndrome. They're not going to get it. Yeah, that's unfortunately true. There's very little information in the field of psychology and psychotherapy about what this is all about. And you're credited with developing the phrase religious trauma syndrome. Can you just briefly tell people about that?
Well, I wrote the book Leaving the Fold in 1994, and basically that goes through all the different issues related to being indoctrinated into a fundamentalist kind of religion, and then steps to recovery. And so that was all fine. And it took me 4 years to write it. It was a really in-depth process. I was going through, and some of it was my own journey going through it. But then I worked with clients for a number of years, both individually and in groups. And we've had an online group that's been international going that meets now it meets 3 times a month, but then it was once a month. So this was going on for years. And what I learned over a period of time was that the religious damage that people have experienced was bigger than I even thought. It was deeper and broader, that people were really, really traumatized, and that it was something more serious than I had even talked about in my book. And so I started wondering what to call it, and also noticing a pattern that the symptoms of this recovery process were pretty similar across individuals, even across religions, that some of the symptoms were the same. And I'm talking about symptoms from the indoctrination itself and living in that system itself, and then also the breaking away. The breaking away is a traumatic event, more or less traumatic for different people for some reasons, but nevertheless that shift is so huge. It's like you're moving from one world to another, and it's enormous, and it's very stressful, and it affects your social network, your family. It affects everything in your life. So it makes sense that it is traumatic, and that there's some pain involved, and that there's a lot of struggle in dealing with the recovery process and rebuilding your life. So I started seeing this as a real pattern, and that's what a syndrome is. A syndrome is when you have a collection of symptoms that pertain to a certain population. Okay, mm-hmm. So that's why I used the word syndrome and labeled it religious trauma syndrome after consulting with colleagues who were familiar with the whole thing and debating various names for it. And that was what we ended up with as something that would be a good label for it, and shortened to RTS, and mm-hmm. then wrote about that and was published in the British journal Behavior Therapy Today. So that's how it started, and people started reading out those articles. I wrote a series of 3 articles about it.
Yes, and your schooling. You explain again what you got your degree in.
My master's degree is in social ecology from the University of California. My doctorate is in human development and family studies from Penn State. And that's an interesting thing, because human development is a little different from a psychology degree in that it addresses the whole person, not just the psychology, but the whole person, emotionally, intellectually, socially, physically, and looks at growth and aging across the lifespan, changes across the lifespan. And then you can specialize within that. And I was specializing in adult development. And part of that is the transitions that people go through. The big changes. The one that everybody knows about is the midlife crisis.
Yep, been there.
Midlife crisis. But there are other transitions that are equally important, and certainly some huge development in childhood. So that was my degree. And then I also took the graduate courses to get the license in psychology, because I wanted to be in practice. So I did that as well. And then lived in Colorado which is where I became licensed as a psychologist, and I've been licensed ever since. I also lived in Australia for a while and got the license there as a psychologist.
Wow. Wow. I guess we're lucky to have you in North America. I think a lot of people head over to Australia and they never come back because it's so beautiful over there. Oh, that is really interesting. So your education uniquely positioned you to see the different developmental stages that humans go through and how religion can kind of interfere in each of those stages.
Yeah, some of what the whole syndrome is about is developmental delays, not necessarily psychopathology, but certainly some real developmental delays, because people are taught to not think for themselves. It's dangerous to do your own thinking, right? When you're in a religious context, and you're told not to trust yourself. And so there's a cognitive delay with just learning how to think critically, how to make decisions, and how to have some agency in your life, because you're always looking for God's will. So there's some problems with that.
So when we look at what's going on in America today, then with the rise of Christian nationalism, I feel like the work you do is more important than ever. I know in my practice since 2016, I have had more and more clients coming to me because the church started endorsing the former president, and the rise of QAnon was happening, and they were losing their parents to these extremist views. So I imagine you have really seen that in your practice as well.
Yeah, and the whole political situation has also caused more fracturing in families, because families that are religious and evangelical in particular, that have sided with the former president and believe some of the conspiracy theories, has caused huge problems for individuals and families, and a lot more division. So even more loss in that regard, because not only, is discussion about religion not okay at the family dinner table, but politics is very volatile as well. So Thanksgiving and Christmas become even harder.
Boy, isn't that that is definitely the truth. And so what do you tell people when they say, they're worried about that if they come out to their parents, and I mean come out in the sense of revealing to their religious relatives that they're no longer believers? People seem to have quite a fear around doing that, because of course they're afraid it'll damage the relationship. And what's your insight around that?
Well, this is the problem that I call intimacy versus integrity. Because a lot of times people will keep it a secret because it's not acceptable to the family and they don't want to have those ruptures of relationship. But then after a period of time, it kind of gets harder and harder, because you want to be known for who you really are. That's kind of a normal urge that people have. They want to just be who they are and be accepted. So that's why it is a little bit like coming out as gay. So, So you're longing for this connection, this intimacy with and continuance of relationship with family, and wondering how to do that. It happens in a lot of different ways. Sometimes people reveal bits and pieces and do it slowly. Sometimes it's like just a sit down talk and say, yo, I don't believe anymore, and this is how it is, and tough luck. But I think there are ways of explaining yourself to your family members with compassion, because you know it's going to be hard for them. So you can do that with some empathy, but also with some honesty and some courage, because you have a right to be who you are. You have a right to believe and behave in the way that you see fit. And so, in my opinion, what I say to people is that adjusting to the situation is their problem, not yours. And a lot of times people have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility for their parents. And some of this may come from the fourth commandment of honoring your parents, or whatever. But this idea that, oh, they're going to be upset and shattered, and I don't want that to happen to them, and they won't be able to handle it. But the truth is that people do adjust. People do adjust and finally come around to dealing with it, because you are family. Now, this, of course, depends on a particular family and on a particular religious group. Like some are more prone to shunning the leaver, like Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, or even just Mormons or your more fundamentalist family that doesn't want you around a lot because of your new views. So there is that to deal with. And so unfortunately, there is this process of learning to cope with their attitudes and behaviors, and really deciding yourself whether or not that's worth it. And for most people who have finally come to this stage of wanting personal integrity in their life, figure out a way of working with that so that it is worth it. And then developing a new kind of relationship, because it's not going to be the same. It's not going to ever be the same, because now you're kind of in two different worlds philosophically. Mm-hmm. And there may be things that you can't really talk about. There may be a lack of depth to the relationship, but it doesn't mean that you can't have relationship. You can still stick with subjects that are safe, and you can still stick with your ability to just relate to their humanity and encourage them to do the same. Let's just try to treat each other like human beings, and know that people who are religiously devout also have a persona that is totally human. They still get up in the morning and do their thing. They still have interest in food and children and games and holidays and bowling or whatever it is they do. They still have a human side. And so that's what you have to connect with.
Mm-hmm. Oh boy, you said it so beautifully. It really, when we are coming out to believing family and we're coming out as a non-believer, they don't have to approve, but they do have to accept. If they want to maintain a degree of intimacy or closeness in our lives, then they're going to have to accept that we no longer believe the way that they believe. This is also where I think your group, Journey Free, is so helpful, because if we feel that shift in closeness, we lose some of that closeness with our extended family and with our parents and so forth. And it's really time for us to be building a safe, secular support network and community. Yeah. And so people can join Release and Reclaim through Journey Free. And then they do have access to support with the twice monthly group support calls, participating in the online forum, and then attending your retreats in person as well. And you actually have a retreat coming up. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah. In December 8 to 11, it's 3 days, Thursday evening to Sunday afternoon. We're going to have an intensive experience that will focus on activities that are related to recovering from religious harm. Also have some fun time together and some social time and time in the hot tub or whatever. But and we're going to have a sing along and a talent show. So there's going to be a lot of downtime like that. But we're going to focus on what we can understand about what we've been through. That's, first of all, understanding what you've been through and being clear on that. And then learning about trauma, what that is, and learning how to intervene with emotional flashbacks, also known as triggering. What happens when you get triggered? What happens to yourself physiologically, and what can you do about it? And what can you do to learn a trigger response system for how to handle that? Mm-hmm. And then also work with your inner child. Know that you have a very precious inner child that you need to get to know and take care of. You also have an inner adult That's that part of you that knows what's going on and has lots of ability to do self-care. And maybe that was the one you were talking to all along when you were praying, back in the day. Mm-hmm. So getting acquainted with your parts of self and learning that self-care, learning about the idea monster, which is like your inner critic gone wild. Can give you a really hard time and make you scared, make you feel guilty, make you feel sad about leaving the faith, and needs to be dealt with and confronted and tamed. I'd say taming your monster. So we'll do some work around that, but also just getting to know a group of people that are on a similar path, that you're not alone. It's very, very powerful. We do a lot of storytelling. Everybody is going to share their story, and then we're going to listen carefully and accept each person's story. We don't have to have new doctrines or new agreements about what we believe, but we can empower each other to pursue for each person to pursue their own path and find out what's true for you, and not without being forced to conform anymore. And that's very liberating, very exciting, and knowing that you're not alone. And so people by the end of the retreat are usually pretty good friends. A lot of times they stay in touch. Mm-hmm. And so it's a powerful thing to go through.
It is. And I really want to encourage any of our listeners today who are hearing this. So this is in December of 2022 that you're hosting this retreat, and tell us where it is going to be.
Oh, okay. Missed that part. It's in Western Massachusetts, in a little town called Plainfield. The retreat center is called Nine Mountain, and they specialize in retreats for personal growth. It's a very beautiful setting with woods around us that you can hike around in. And I'm
really looking forward to it. So my husband and I are both going to attend, and we actually met through you at some of your in some of your online groups and retreats, and I am very pleased to be able to share a portion of my Divorcing Religion workshop with the people who are attending your retreat in December. So I think you only have just a couple more spaces that are open for that. Am I right?
Yeah, we just have a handful of spaces open. Yeah.
Well, okay. Well, folks, we'll have contact information available at the end of the show and in the show notes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Very good. Yeah, you're welcome. So here you are now, all these years out from your own process of divorcing religion. And what's in the pipeline for you right now? Are you still focused on your private practice? Are you thinking of another book? What's going on with you these days?
Well, interesting. There's a movie coming out, a documentary about a previous retreat.
Right.
By some Swedish filmmakers that came to our retreat in California, called Leaving Jesus. So look for it next year. It'll be at film festivals and eventually probably on Netflix or someplace like that. And it's all about the individuals that came to that retreat. So they filmed things that were there that weekend, and then also followed up with people in their homes to find out how they were all doing with their lives. So I'm looking forward to reviewing the draft of the film this next week with the director.
Wonderful.
I'll sit down and look at the whole thing and talk about how to finish it up. So that's exciting. I will continue to see people individually and individual consultations with the religious recovery, and also facilitate this ongoing group that we have. That and then the other thing is that we have a special group of helping professionals that meet monthly, people that are therapists or social workers or life coaches, anybody that is in a position to be working with people that are in religious recovery. anybody that has contact with that population. And we'd like to know more about special methods that are effective, special areas of information. There's a special group that you can join within the larger group and meet on a monthly basis. We talk about key topics that are relevant to working with this group, like how to help people with the fear of hell, or how to help people with aspects of divorcing religion, and the grief and the anger. What kinds of tools do we have, and what kinds of understanding? So it's partly psychoeducational in this approach. We also look at special populations, like how to work with ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or how to work with ex-Mormons. This next session we have a guest who's ex-Muslim who will be there and talking to us from London about her experience recovering from Islam. So that group is growing and is very exciting. And so I feel like I'm kind of passing the baton, as I'm getting older and thinking about retirement. I feel like there are all these other people who are wanting to know more about this type of work and eager to learn it. So I'm very happy about taking this more leadership role in that process.
Do you ever hear from people who are still religious? Maybe they're a religious counselor or a Christian counselor, because I know there are tons of them. Do you ever hear from those folks who say, well, I want to learn about religious trauma and religious trauma syndrome? And there is a disconnect often between they think that that's what happens in everyone else's religion, but not in their religion.
Well, yeah, there are people actually, and not even just liberal Christians who have a whole different view of Christianity. It's almost like a different religion, who are concerned about not doing a harm to their flock, their believers, and want to know more about that. This group that I'm talking about with helping professionals is not limited to people who are without religion, but anybody who wants to know about how to work with these folks.
The religious trauma syndrome hasn't made its way into the DSM, and it might never. We don't know, but it is. The syndrome seems to be quite similar to complex PTSD, some of the things that people experience. Does that seem right?
Yeah. And actually, it's a combination really of complex PTSD and PTSD itself, because PTSD itself usually refers to an event, something traumatic that you experienced, and your nervous system reacted a certain way, and so therefore you were traumatized. Whereas CPTSD, complex PTSD, is when there are lots of occasions, maybe smaller occasions, and within religious trauma, we might call those traumatic traumatic events. As an occasional, as an everyday, sort of like child abuse or domestic violence, where it's a constant thing that you're living with. So growing up and being told that you're basically bad and wrong, that you're going to hell, messages like that can be repeated on a regular basis to where it really affects a child, and it affects you growing up to have these deep assumptions about yourself and about life that have basically traumatized you and need to be re-examined to see what that effect has been on you. So in that sense, it's very much like complex PTSD in this a cumulative effect of what it can do to you.
Yes, I just did a podcast interview with Shirley Fessel, and her whole area of interest is basically domestic violence in a religious context. So wives and children where the the father in the home is deeply religious and thinks it's within his scope to be abusing them, thinks that he has biblical backup for doing those things. And that can be especially hard if the woman is also a believer. I mean, they're looking at the same Bible, they're reading the same Bible verses, and he is, rather than cherishing her, he is abusing her and abusing the children. It can be really hard for those folks to get out, and then also to try and then come to terms with, well, what do I still believe this? What parts of it do I believe? It's a real reckoning of identity and values and beliefs.
Yeah. What I have talked about is in terms of religious harm is that it comes as toxic doctrines and toxic practices. Toxic doctrines are things like I was just talking about with original sin or hell, and also I just have concluded that all the fundamentalist forms of all the religions basically teach two really huge assumptions. One is you're not okay, and one is you're not safe. You're not okay from birth, you're bad and wrong and need saving, and you're not safe. You have to worry about your afterlife situation with going to hell. You have to worry about living in the evil world and Satan and demons being around everywhere and not having any resources to deal with that. So there are these doctrines that are toxic. And then there are also these practices of, for example, the father being the head of the house and having all this kind of authority and this like hierarchy of authority that goes on, and what happens to women and children in that process. And also child rearing practices, very old-fashioned punishment-oriented practices, including physical corporal punishment that have scientifically been known for a long time to be destructive, and certainly not the only way to manage behavior. But fundamentalist families tend not to educate themselves in child development, in parenting, even very solid findings that we have about what works and doesn't work, and what to know about the mental and emotional development of a small child. That's important to know as a parent in the way that you treat a child. So they're instead using verses like "spare the rod, spoil the child," still doing things like that, and that being very prevalent as a child rearing philosophy. So all those areas are of concern.
They I think particularly also are of concern given the political nature of what's going on in the United States right now. Mm-hmm. We look at countries like Iran and condemn the religious oppression that's going on there. But there are certainly fundamentalist Christian groups and fundamentalist evangelical groups around the world, including America, that espouse a return to Old Testament practices. And that's just unacceptable in 2022. We have evolved as a civilization beyond that. I like to think that we have, but now with the dismantling of Roe v. Wade, taking away rights of bodily autonomy to women and girls in the United States, it feels kind of scary. It feels like an uncertain time. And in times of uncertainty, a lot of people run towards religion. So I'm wondering, what can we be doing to fill that gap? Is this where humanism comes in? And we want to be teaching people about secular humanism rather than fundamentalist religion.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, secular humanism is a much more humane approach to life, right? And empowering rather than diminishing people's self. I've done a little writing about the collective trauma of religion. It's collective trauma, which is defined as something that a trauma that affects a whole group, a whole population. And we've certainly had some people have written about the collective trauma of the Trump era. and how we have all suffered from that. But also, I think that we've suffered as a society, and all Western society, not just the U.S., but especially in the U.S., where evangelical religion is so big. There's a collective trauma of the results of these very toxic teachings. Like, for example, teaching you that it's not okay to think for yourself. It's not okay to, instead of treating you like a rational being with some personal integrity and resources and able to participate in a democracy, for example, and simply denigrating all of science, as if it's not a legitimate way of knowing things, and preferring the type of knowledge that is revealed knowledge, from authority or from a book. That kind of attitude towards knowledge itself. And then, of course, this whole hierarchical business and attitude towards women. And so there are all these attitudes and practices in religion that have really permeated the whole society, and people haven't really noticed the connection. And yet, even at the January 6th uprising, there were lots of Jesus saves signs. There were lots of Christians in attendance there, because they're essentially not interested in democracy. They really want a theocracy. They want the authorities to dictate laws that are going to support their morals.
But yes, only a Christian theocracy. No other type of theocracy will do. Right. Only a Christian one. Right. Wow. And we see too, I guess, the Christianity kind of played out in the penal system as well, where it's punitive rather than restorative. And that is concerning too.
Yeah. And also in the educational system, where children are treated like they're just vessels to be filled with information, instead of creative beings on their own that need to be developed and encouraged to develop themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And certainly I hear in my practice from a lot of folks who were either homeschooled by very, very religious parents who didn't have any kind of background in education. And a lot of times they did not receive a superior, they received an inferior education in many cases. And then also I hear from folks who were schooled in Christian schools, fundamentalist Christian schools from kindergarten all through grade 12, and then attended, Liberty University or some other Christian type university. And they have so much to unpack when they get to a point of, oh no, I'm not sure that this actually is the right way to think and behave. And it's just so much, as you say, so much grief as their identity and their worldview dissolve around them. And then the parents are very worried that they're not following Jesus anymore. How did that go about with you when you told your folks that you didn't believe anymore? Were you one of the little bit at a time people, or were you a rip the Band-Aid off kind of person when you told your family?
Well, I didn't really tell my family. I think they just figured it out from the fact that I was not going to church anymore, and I wasn't talking the talk anymore, doing the witnessing at the beach or door-to-door work that was my life before that. And then also trying to discuss with them things I was learning in college, not going over very well. And then, of course, eventually writing my book, I tried to keep discussion about my family and personal stuff out of the book. So, it was certainly not an attack on them. But nevertheless, my mother was pretty hurt by that coming out. But they've mostly said very little and kept their feelings to themselves. I think they don't quite know how to process the fact that I am doing okay, that my life is not a mess.
Right.
And, yeah.
And so you were able to maintain a relationship with your family, even though it looks different than it did before, because you don't have the same closeness around religious beliefs that you had before.
Yeah, although there were some years there early on where there was a lot of arguing, because I would try to debate them. I would try to get more family members on my side, and I was just astonished that my siblings did not want to also break away. I have 4 siblings, and they're all totally involved in missionary work and Christian work of some kind. I'm the only one who left the faith in the family. So I've had to find, outside support, outside friends and colleagues that can understand the process.
Yeah, boy. Yeah, there is definitely value in building that secular support network, because we all do need some support and community, and to feel that we are accepted somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, it was getting married. I was married to a man who grew up totally secular, and just to try to understand me, he read some of the Bible, and he was one time sitting and reading Genesis, and he was going, "This is terrible," and, and it was like really, really interesting to me to have that fresh kind of reaction. Like, yeah, there's some pretty awful stuff in there.
I find it really refreshing to spend time with people who grew up completely secular, because they just do not have the religious baggage that those of us who grew up in religion often come away with.
Yeah, yeah.
I feel like codependence is also a really big thing that a lot of us have to deal with. And if we were raised in the church, it's kind of like that's very much encouraged, the codependency, and even almost a Stockholm syndrome type of thing, where God's the abuser, the potential abuser, but we have to worship God. And it takes a while to see through that and find our way out of that.
Yeah.
Boy, I'd really recommend your book, Leaving the Fold, to everyone who's watching or listening to this podcast. And I hope that folks will visit your website, journeyfree.org, and consider attending your retreats. I think you mentioned this is about your 20th retreat that you've hosted.
Yeah. And it's the first one since the pandemic. So it's been a couple of years.
Right.
Since we've done it. And
previously they've been in California.
Yeah. They've all, and then I moved to Massachusetts. So now I'm doing one that's local here. Yeah.
Very good.
We have people traveling here from all over.
I know some folks coming from Canada.
Yeah, I know. I'm so appreciative of you coming.
Oh, we're really looking forward to it. Thanks so much for joining us today. And everyone, thanks for tuning in to the Divorcing Religion podcast. I'll have information on Dr. Winell and how you can contact her in the show notes. I want to encourage you to subscribe to the Conference on Religious Trauma YouTube channel so that you never miss an episode of the Divorcing Religion podcast. And I encourage you to consider supporting me on Patreon, where we have all sorts of great bonus content for you. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Thanks, Dr. Winell.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.